Somebody dressed up the maid real nice tonight.
That's what the groom whispered to his boys, loud enough for the whole table to hear, while staring directly at the black woman in the emerald dress.
Excuse me?
Oh, don't get offended. I'm just saying, the dress is cute, but lipstick on a cockroach don't make it a butterfly.
His groomsmen burst out laughing. 200 guests sat there, silent.
Regina tilted her head.
You done?
Be a good girl and bust these tables before you leave. Least you could do for the free meal.
Her fingers brushed the clutch in her lap. What Garrett Sullivan didn't know was that 3 phones were already recording. Every word. And what those cameras captured that night would follow him for the rest of his life. Whew. But to understand how deep this goes, you need to know who Regina Davis really was before that night. To understand what happened at that reception, you need to understand who Regina Davis actually was, long before she ever put on that emerald dress. Regina grew up in Southeast D.C. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility. Her father left before she could remember his face. The person who raised her, really raised her, was her Aunt Lorraine. Lorraine Davis was the kind of woman who kept her house spotless, her Bible close, and her opinions closer. She raised Regina and her niece Olivia side by side, like sisters. Same bedroom, same rules, same love. Regina was the quiet one. Straight A's, scholarship to Howard University, then a master's in forensic accounting from Georgetown. By 28, she had a badge, a federal salary, and a desk at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Washington, D.C. She spent her days tracing dirty money through shell companies, fake invoices, and offshore accounts. She was good at it. Really good. The kind of agent who could look at a spreadsheet and see what most people couldn't. The lie hiding between the numbers. But none of that was on her social media. No badge photos. No FBI posts. To the outside world, Regina Davis was just a quiet, well-dressed black woman who kept to herself. And that's exactly how she wanted it. Olivia was the opposite. Warm, open, trusting, sometimes too trusting. She was the one who laughed the loudest at family cookouts, who cried during commercials, who believed the best in everyone, even when the evidence said otherwise. After college, she moved to Northern Virginia for a marketing job. That's where she met Garrett Sullivan. Garrett was handsome, confident, old money. His family owned Sullivan and Caldwell, a construction firm that had been winning county contracts in Loudoun County for over 2 decades. His father, Theodore, everyone called him Teddy, ran the company like a kingdom, and Garrett was the prince. On paper, the relationship moved fast. 6 months of dating, a ring, a wedding date set at the Sullivan family estate. 200 acres of manicured land with a stone gate and a family crest above the entrance. The kind of place that whispered old power before you even stepped inside. Regina had concerns from the beginning. Not because Garrett was white. She didn't care about that. Because Garrett was controlling. Small things at first. He chose where they ate. He picked Olivia's outfits for family events. He made comments about her neighborhood, her friends, her family, always wrapped in a joke, always delivered with a smile. Regina noticed. Aunt Lorraine noticed. But Olivia was in love, and love has a way of making red flags look like decorations. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, Regina saw the 2 families side by side for the first time. The Sullivans filled one half of the room, loud, polished, country club comfortable. The Davis family filled the other, warm, close, holding plates of food they didn't choose from a menu they didn't pick. A Sullivan cousin leaned over to another and said, just loud enough, "Finally, some real food, not whatever they brought." Aunt Lorraine heard it. She squeezed Regina's hand under the table. "Not tonight, baby."
Later that evening, Olivia pulled Regina aside. She was nervous. Not about the wedding, about the paperwork. Garrett had asked her to sign a prenuptial agreement, which she did without her own attorney. He'd also had her sign what he called tax documents, a stack of forms she didn't fully read. He said it was just business stuff, Olivia told her, standard for the family. Regina asked if she'd had anyone review them. Olivia changed the subject.
That night, alone in her room at the estate, Regina sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her suitcase. Inside it was a small lockbox. Inside the lockbox was her FBI badge and her service weapon. She'd packed them out of habit. 10 years in federal law enforcement does that to you. She almost left them at home. She was on vacation. This was her cousin's wedding. She put the lockbox in her clutch bag and zipped it shut. The next morning, she helped Olivia into her wedding dress. Olivia was shaking, happy, nervous, overwhelmed. Regina held her hands, looked her in the eye, and said 5 words that would mean more than either of them knew at the time. "I've always got your back." The ceremony itself was beautiful. White flowers along the aisle, sunset light through the tall windows. Olivia walked toward Garrett with tears already in her eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, Regina let herself believe that maybe she'd been wrong about him. Maybe the red flags were just nerves. Maybe the comments were just bad humor. Maybe this would work. Then she looked at Teddy Sullivan in the front row. He wasn't watching his son get married. He was watching the Davis family, scanning them. His eyes moved from face to face like he was counting how many of them had gotten in. He leaned toward a relative, whispered something. The relative glanced at Aunt Lorraine and smirked. Regina filed that away. She filed everything away. It's what she was trained to do. The reception started 30 minutes after the ceremony. The ballroom was enormous. Chandeliers, a live band, an open bar that probably cost more than Regina's car. Tables were arranged in a wide circle around a dance floor, and at the center of it all was table 1, the family table. Olivia had insisted that Regina sit there, right next to her. Place card printed in gold ink. Regina Davis, Maid of Honor. She found her seat, set down her clutch, took a breath. That's when a Sullivan aunt approached. Blonde, 60s, smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked at Regina, looked at the place card, and said, "Oh, honey, I think there's been some kind of mix-up. The other tables are back there." She gestured vaguely toward the rear of the ballroom, where the catering staff was setting up. Regina picked up her place card and held it so the woman could read it. "My name is right here." The aunt blinked, opened her mouth, closed it, walked away without another word. A black woman on the catering staff, her name was Denise Coleman, caught Regina's eye from across the room. They didn't know each other, but the look they exchanged said everything. Denise had seen the whole thing. She'd seen it because she'd been on the receiving end of looks like that her entire career. Remember, Denise, she matters later. The first hour of the reception was tolerable. Music, dancing, polite small talk between 2 families who had nothing in common except the couple on the dance floor. Regina stayed close to Olivia, kept her glass full of water, and watched. Then Garrett stood up for his toast. He started strong. Funny, even. He talked about the first time he saw Olivia, at a coffee shop in Arlington, reading a book upside down because she was too embarrassed to admit she'd grabbed the wrong one. The room laughed. Olivia blushed. It was charming. Then he went off script. "You know, people ask me, Garrett, what's it like bringing someone so different into the Sullivan family?" He paused, smiled. "And I tell them, Olivia is the most exotic thing the Sullivans have ever brought home. And I don't mean from vacation. Half the room laughed. The Sullivan table erupted. Someone clinked the glass. The Davis side went quiet.
Olivia kept smiling, but her hand moved under the table and squeezed the fabric of her dress until her knuckles paled. Aunt Lorraine closed her eyes for a beat too long. Regina's jaw locked. The room split in that moment. Half the guests laughed because they thought they were supposed to. The other half didn't laugh because they knew exactly what they'd just heard. And Garrett, standing there in his tailored tuxedo with that champagne grin, didn't notice the difference. Or didn't care.
30 minutes later, the dancing was in full swing. Regina had stepped away from the floor to check her phone. She was waiting on a message from her office. Routine follow-up on a case she'd closed before her leave. She sat back down at table 1, alone. That's when Garrett walked over. He had 2 groomsmen behind him, champagne in his hand, that same grin on his face. Loose, loud. The kind of confidence that comes from never being told no in your entire life.
You already heard what he said. Somebody dressed up the maid real nice tonight, then the cockroach line, then the part about bussing tables. Every word delivered with a smile, like he was doing a bit at a comedy club instead of gutting a woman at his own wedding. But here's the part you didn't see in the video. After Garrett said, "Least you could do for the free meal," Regina stood up. Slowly. In her heels, she was taller than him by 2 inches. She looked down at him, literally, and said, very quietly, "You should be real careful about what comes out of your mouth next." Garrett's grin didn't drop, but it changed. It went from amused to something harder. He stepped closer. "Or what? You gonna call somebody? Go ahead. See who they believe. Me or you." See who they believe. Remember that line. It comes back. One of his groomsmen, Colton Perry, the best man, put a hand on Garrett's shoulder. "Come on, man. Let it go." But he didn't say it with conviction. He said it the way people say things when they know they should speak up but don't want to pay the price for it. Garrett shrugged him off and walked away laughing. 200 people in that room. Not one of them said a word. Not the Sullivan relatives who heard everything. Not the college friends at table 6. Not even the band, who had stopped mid-song because the lead singer didn't know what to do. Silence. The kind that doesn't mean peace. The kind that means everyone chose themselves. Olivia rushed over seconds later. Her mascara was already running. She grabbed Garrett's arm in the hallway outside the ballroom. Guests could hear pieces of the argument through the door. "That's my cousin, Garrett. My family." "It was a joke, Liv. Relax." "A joke? You called her... You said she looked like..." "I said, relax. You're making a scene." That was it. Conversation over. Garrett straightened his jacket and walked back into the ballroom like nothing happened. Olivia stood in the hallway, alone, pressing her palms into her eyes. Back inside, Aunt Lorraine was already on her feet. She walked to Regina, took her hand, and held it. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, "That boy doesn't know what's coming." The Davis family began gathering their things. Coats, purses, quiet words to Olivia, who stood near the exit, looking like she was watching 2 worlds split apart in front of her. One by one, they hugged her and left. Regina didn't leave. She sat back down at table 1. She pulled out her phone, and she typed a message. Not to a friend, not to a family group chat. She sent an encrypted email to a colleague at the FBI named Priscilla Watts. The subject line: Sullivan, need a background run. Expedite. She hit send. Then she put her phone away and watched Garrett Sullivan dance with his bride under the chandelier light like a man who believed the world was built for him and him
alone. Within an hour, 3 separate phone recordings of Garrett's remarks were circulating among guests. One was shot from table 3. Wide angle, clear audio, captured Garrett's full body language. The second came from a bridesmaid standing near the bar. It caught Colton Perry's face in the background, the discomfort he tried to hide. The third was filmed by Denise Coleman from the kitchen doorway. And this one caught something the others missed: the Sullivan aunt's confrontation with Regina earlier that evening. By midnight, one of those videos was on social media. By morning, it had 200,000 views. Later that night, Garrett, under pressure from Olivia, sent a text to the Davis family group chat. "Sorry if anyone took my comments the wrong way. It was just wedding humor. No hard feelings." Aunt Lorraine read the message out loud to the family gathered in her living room. Nobody spoke. Then she locked her phone, set it down on the table, and said one thing: "That boy has no idea." Nah, hold on. A cockroach? He called her a cockroach at his own wedding. And nobody said a word. 200 people just sat there. Imagine that's your sister, your mother, your daughter. Now tell me you'd stay quiet. The next morning, the Sullivan estate was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something ugly. Not peaceful, just empty. Leftover champagne glasses sat on tables nobody had cleared. Garrett Sullivan walked through the breakfast room in a bathrobe, pouring coffee like it was any other Sunday. Like nothing had happened. Olivia wasn't with him. She'd spent the night in a guest room on the opposite side of the house. Door locked, phone in her hand, scrolling through hundreds of comments under a video she wished didn't exist. Some of them were defending Garrett. Most of them weren't. The hashtag was already trending in Virginia. Regina was in her room, but she wasn't scrolling. She was working. Her laptop was open on the bed. Priscilla Watts, her colleague at the bureau, had come through fast. The background check on Garrett Sullivan was sitting in her encrypted inbox. And what it showed made Regina sit very still for a very long time. Sullivan and Caldwell, the family construction firm, had 6 active contracts with Loudoun County. Roads, schools, a municipal parking structure. Standard government work. Except the numbers didn't add up. Multiple shell companies were registered under Sullivan family names, scattered across Delaware and Nevada. Wire transfers bounced through accounts in the Cayman Islands. And there was a flag. An IRS inquiry from 2 years ago that had been opened, escalated, and then suddenly downgraded to low priority. Just like that. Someone inside the county had made it go away. Regina stared at the screen. She'd spent a decade reading financial records. She knew what clean money looked like. And this wasn't it. This wasn't even close. But here's where it got complicated. Regina was on leave. This wasn't her assigned case. If she inserted herself without authorization, anything she touched could be thrown out in court. A defense attorney would have a field day. So she had to be smart about it. She called Priscilla, kept her voice even. "I need you to flag this to the white-collar division, quietly. Don't attach my name yet, and pull everything you can find on Sullivan and Caldwell's county contracts going back 6 years. Priscilla paused. "Regina, are you okay?" "Just pull the files. I'll explain later." She hung up and closed her laptop. She didn't tell Olivia. Not yet. She couldn't. Because what Regina was looking at wasn't just a bad husband. It was a criminal operation, and if the financials were what they appeared to be, Olivia was already in the middle of it without knowing. Meanwhile, and this is where the story splits into 2 lanes, a detective named Nathan Brooks was sitting at his desk in the Loudoun County Police Department, staring at a tip that had come in through the anonymous hotline. A local subcontractor claimed that Sullivan and Caldwell had been inflating invoices on county projects for years. The subcontractor said he'd been told to falsify inspection reports. He said he had proof. And he said he was scared. Brooks was a veteran. 22 years on the job, not easily impressed and not easily fooled. But something about this tip felt real. The details were too specific to be a grudge. He opened a file, labeled it Sullivan, and started pulling records. He had no idea about the wedding. He had no idea about the video. And he had no idea that 3 miles away, an FBI agent was looking at the same family from a completely different angle.
2 days after the wedding, Olivia called Regina. She was crying, but not about the reception. Not about the cockroach comment or the video or the silence of 200 guests. About something she'd found on Garrett's desk. A document. A list of accounts with her name on them. Accounts she had never opened. Companies she had never heard of. Her signature, right there at the bottom of each page. Regina kept her voice steady. "Olivia, did you sign anything besides the prenup?" "He had me sign a bunch of stuff before the wedding. He said it was tax paperwork, standard stuff for the family business." "Did you read any of it?" Silence. Then, no. Regina closed her eyes. Her cousin's signature was on shell company filings. The documents were dated 3 weeks before the wedding, which meant Garrett hadn't just married Olivia, he'd set her up. If the investigation went public, Olivia's name was on every piece of paper that mattered. She would look like a willing participant in a $12 million fraud. The trap had already closed, and Olivia had walked right into it in a white dress. That same week, the wedding video crossed over from social media into local news. A reporter in Northern Virginia ran a segment. Groom's racist remarks at reception go viral. Garrett hired a PR consultant within 24 hours. A polished statement was released. Mr. Sullivan's comments were taken out of context and do not reflect his values or those of the Sullivan family. Context. That word does a lot of heavy lifting for people who say terrible things on camera. But here's what the PR consultant didn't know, and what Garrett didn't think to worry about. The media attention wasn't just bad for his reputation. It was putting a spotlight on Sullivan and Caldwell. Business partners started asking questions. A county official who'd been friendly with the Sullivans for years quietly stopped returning Teddy's calls. The walls weren't closing in yet, but they were starting to move. 2 weeks after the wedding, Detective Nathan Brooks hit a wall. He'd been pulling records on Sullivan and Caldwell every day since that anonymous tip came in. And the more he pulled, the worse it looked. Inflated invoices on at least 3 county contracts. Line items that didn't match the work completed. Payments routed to companies that had no employees, no offices, and no reason to exist, except to move money. But every time Brooks pushed deeper, something pushed back. The county clerk's office was slow to respond. A supervisor called him in and said, "Nathan, I'm not telling you to drop it. I'm just saying there are cases with better closure rates," which is the polite way of saying, drop it. Brooks didn't drop it. He called a contact at the Virginia State Attorney's Office, laid out everything he had, shell companies, fake invoices, an IRS inquiry that mysteriously went cold. She listened. Then she said something that changed everything. "Funny you should call about the Sullivans. The feds already have a file." Brooks paused. "The feds?" "FBI, financial crimes. They've been building something quietly. I can connect you to the case agent." 3 days later, Nathan Brooks walked into a conference room at the FBI field office in Washington, D.C. He carried a folder with everything he'd gathered. He figured he'd meet some senior agent in a gray suit who'd been working fraud cases for decades.
The door opened. Sitting at the table was a black woman in a navy blue suit. Badge clipped to her belt, case files spread in front of her. Completely in control of the room. She stood, extended her hand.
Special Agent Regina Davis, FBI, Financial Crimes Unit. I believe we're looking at the same family. Brooks shook her hand, then stopped. He stared at her face. He'd seen it before. Everyone in Northern Virginia had. On their phones, on the news, in a video viewed over 1 million times. The woman in the emerald dress. The woman the groom called a cockroach. She was standing in front of him with a federal badge and a case file thick enough to put the Sullivans in prison.
You were at the wedding, Brooks said. You're the woman in the video. I was at the wedding as a guest. I'm here as lead investigator on a federal fraud case. Those are two different things, detective. Brooks sat back. 22 years as a cop. He'd seen a lot. But this was something else. The woman Garrett humiliated in front of 200 people was the federal agent building the case that would dismantle his entire family.
He said it quietly.
He called an FBI agent a cockroach at his own wedding. And she had more power in that room than anyone.
Regina didn't respond. She opened the file.
Sullivan and Caldwell had been overbilling county contracts for at least 6 years. Teddy Sullivan started it. Small overcharges buried in large invoices. Garrett expanded the operation when he joined 4 years ago. Shell companies in Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming. Offshore accounts in the Caymans. Fake subcontractors submitting invoices for work that never happened. Total estimated fraud? North of $12 million. And 4 of those shell companies had Olivia's signature on the incorporation documents. Listed as co-owner. She'd signed the paperwork 3 weeks before the wedding. The tax documents Garrett told her were routine. On paper, she looked like a willing partner in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. One more piece. The IRS inquiry that died 2 years ago was killed by Douglas Caldwell. The Caldwell in Sullivan and Caldwell, Teddy's brother-in-law. He'd flagged it as low priority and buried it in a backlog where no one would ever touch it. Brooks stared at the flowcharts, wire transfers, highlighted invoices, $12 million moving through fake companies while the Sullivans smiled at charity galas. Nobody caught this? Someone did, Regina said. Your subcontractor. Me. And now you. 3 people is enough. Brooks looked at her. The video. The way he talked to you. Did that? I requested his background check before I left the reception. No emotion, just fact. The video made the news. The news made his partners nervous. Nervous people get sloppy. Sloppy people leave trails. She paused. Garrett did me a favor that night. He put a spotlight on himself. And when you turn a spotlight on a man with $12 million in dirty money, the shadows disappear fast. This wasn't revenge. This was a federal agent doing what she was trained to do. Follow the money. Build the case. Let the evidence speak louder than any insult. But one thing made this case different from every other file on her desk. Olivia, her cousin, her sister in everything but blood. The woman she helped into a wedding dress and promised, "I've always got your back." That promise wasn't just words anymore. If Regina made a single mistake, a defense attorney would argue Olivia was complicit. And the woman who walked into that marriage trusting the wrong man would walk into a courtroom carrying his crimes. Regina couldn't let that happen. Which meant this case had to be airtight. No shortcuts, no emotion, no room for a single crack. 3 weeks after the wedding, Regina and Brooks were now working in parallel. She led the federal investigation, he handled the local angle. Everything shared through proper interagency channels. Everything by the book. Because if even one piece of evidence was obtained the wrong way, the Sullivans' lawyers would tear the whole case apart. And the Sullivans could afford very good lawyers. The first witness came forward on her own. Denise Coleman, the black woman on the catering staff, the one who caught Regina's eye across the ballroom that night, the one who filmed the Sullivan aunt confronting Regina from the kitchen doorway. Denise had worked for a catering company that Sullivan and Caldwell had contracted for corporate events. She'd done 4 jobs for them over the past year, and every single time, something was off. Her company billed Sullivan and Caldwell $15,000 per event, but Denise, who handled the invoices on her end, noticed that the county was being charged $32,000 for the same events. The difference went somewhere, just not to her company. She'd been afraid to say anything. Who was she going to tell? The Sullivans owned half the county contracts. Her boss told her to keep quiet and cash the checks. But then she saw the wedding video. She recognized Regina, the woman at the table, the woman who didn't flinch. And something shifted. Denise called the FBI tip line. 2 days later, she was sitting across from Regina in a conference room, handing over pay stubs, invoices, and emails that showed a clear pattern. Sullivan and Caldwell was double billing on every catering contract. The county paid full price. The vendor got half. The rest vanished into one of Garrett's shell companies. Witness number 2 was harder to get. Colton Perry, Garrett's best man, the one who put his hand on Garrett's shoulder at the reception and said, "Come on, man, let it go." The one who looked at the floor while his best friend called a woman a cockroach. Colton had been carrying that moment ever since. Not because he was a hero. He wasn't. He stayed quiet when it mattered. He laughed when he should have spoken. But guilt is a slow poison, and Colton had been drinking it for 3 weeks. What tipped him over wasn't the video. It was something older. Colton had worked at Sullivan and Caldwell's office the summer after college, a temporary gig, filing, copying, running errands for Teddy. And one afternoon, he walked into Teddy's office to deliver a package and found the old man feeding documents into a shredder. Not 1 or 2 pages, stacks. Colton saw the IRS letterhead before the pages disappeared. Teddy looked up, smiled, and said, "Spring cleaning." Colton never mentioned it to anyone. Until now. He agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity consideration. He gave a signed statement describing the shredding in detail, dates, approximate volume, the IRS letterhead he recognized. It wasn't enough to convict on its own, but it was enough to prove that Teddy Sullivan knew about the IRS inquiry and deliberately destroyed evidence. Witness number 3, Harold Simmons, the subcontractor who had originally called the anonymous tip line that put Brooks on the case. Harold ran a small paving company. He'd worked under Sullivan and Caldwell for 3 years. And for 3 years, Garrett had pressured him to sign off on inspection reports that didn't match the actual work. Roads paved with substandard materials. Drainage systems that didn't meet code. Reports that said, "complete," when the job was 60% done. Harold handed over a stack of falsified inspection reports. And on 4 of them, in the margins, were handwritten notes in Garrett's handwriting. Things like, "adjust numbers before submission," and "use the revised estimate, not the actual." A handwriting analyst confirmed the match within a week. 3 witnesses, 3 different angles, 3 people who had stayed quiet for too long, and finally decided that the Sullivans weren't worth their silence. While Regina was building the case from the outside, the pressure was building inside the Sullivan house. Garrett noticed it first. Business partners who used to return his calls within the hour were taking days. 2 pending county contracts were paused, officially under review, but everyone knew what that meant. His PR consultant called with more bad news. A local reporter wasn't asking about the wedding video anymore. She was asking about Sullivan and Caldwell's finances. Specifically, about county contracts. Specifically, about invoice discrepancies. Garrett drove to his father's house.
Teddy was in his study, calm as always, bourbon in hand. He listened to his son's panic without changing expression. "I've handled worse," Teddy said. "Just keep your wife quiet and let me work." Then he told Garrett something that revealed exactly what kind of man Theodore Sullivan was. "Get Olivia to sign a power of attorney. Full financial control. If this thing gets messy, we need a firewall. And she's it." A firewall. That's what Teddy called his son's wife. A human shield between the Sullivan family and a federal investigation. The plan was simple and cold. If the fraud was uncovered, Olivia's name was already on the shell companies. With a power of attorney, Garrett would control every account, but Olivia would be the one on paper. She'd take the fall. The Sullivans would survive. They always survived. Garrett went home and put the document on the kitchen table. He told Olivia it was just a formality, something their accountant recommended for estate planning. Olivia picked up the pen. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Regina. "Don't sign anything, not a single page. Call me." She put the pen down. That night, Olivia called Regina. She was whispering. Garrett was downstairs. "He's been different since the wedding. He checks my phone. He gets angry when I talk to Aunt Lorraine. He told me if I talk to anyone about our finances, he'll make sure I never see a dime in the divorce." Regina gripped the phone. Every instinct she had, as an agent, as a cousin, as a woman, told her to drive over there right now. But she couldn't. Telling Olivia about the investigation would compromise the case. If Olivia confronted Garrett, he'd destroy evidence. If she ran, he'd know something was wrong. Regina had to keep the wall between her personal life and the case. So she gave Olivia the only thing she could. Do not sign anything. If you feel unsafe, pack a bag and go to Aunt Lorraine's house. Don't tell Garrett where you're going. Just go. Olivia's voice cracked. He'll be furious. Let him be. The next domino fell 4 days later. Douglas Caldwell, Teddy's brother-in-law, the county official who killed the IRS inquiry, was pulled into a meeting at the FBI field office. They didn't arrest him. They didn't need to. They sat him down, spread the evidence across the table, and showed him exactly how much trouble he was in. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy, abuse of public office. Caldwell folded in 11 minutes. He didn't even ask for a lawyer first. He handed over emails between himself and Teddy, dozens of them, going back 3 years, meeting notes, and the piece that cracked the case wide open, a recorded phone call. Caldwell had been nervous enough to record one of his conversations with Teddy 8 months ago. On the recording, Teddy's voice was clear. "Just make the IRS thing go away, Doug. Tell them it's low priority. By the time they circle back, we'll have moved everything offshore." 2 independent voice analysts confirmed it was Teddy Sullivan. Regina played the recording in the conference room. Brooks listened with his arms crossed. When it ended, he said, "That's it. That's the case." "Almost," Regina said. "We still need Olivia out of that house." 5 days later, a Tuesday morning. Garrett left for the office early. Olivia waited 15 minutes. Then she packed one bag: passport, personal documents, the wedding photo of her and Regina, the one taken the morning she got into her dress. She drove to Aunt Lorraine's house in Southeast D.C. When she walked through the door, Lorraine was standing in the hallway like she'd been waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask why. She just pulled Olivia in and held her. For a long time, neither of them said a word. Garrett came home that evening to an empty house. He called Olivia. Voicemail. Called Aunt Lorraine. No answer. Called Colton. Nothing. He stood in his kitchen, phone in hand, surrounded by silence. For the first time in his life,
Garrett Sullivan was in a room where no one was on his side. The silence at the wedding had protected him. 200 people who said nothing while he tore a woman apart. That silence was his armor. Now the silence was something else entirely. It was the sound of every person he thought he controlled deciding, one by one, that he wasn't worth protecting anymore. 1 week later, the FBI and Loudoun County PD obtained a joint warrant. Sullivan and Caldwell offices, the Sullivan estate, Garrett's home office. Every financial record, every electronic device, every document connected to the shell companies, including the prenup, and every paper Olivia had been pressured to sign. Before the raid, Regina did one more thing. She formally recused herself from any part of the investigation directly involving Olivia's legal exposure. She handed that file to a colleague. She stayed on as lead agent for the Sullivan and Caldwell fraud case, but her cousin's fate would be decided by someone else. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. But she'd spent her career building cases that couldn't be torn apart in court. If she handled both sides, a defense attorney would argue conflict of interest and get evidence thrown out. She wasn't going to let that happen. Not for the Sullivans. Not even for family. She'd promised Olivia, "I've always got your back." And this, stepping aside to protect the integrity of the case, was exactly what that promise looked like. 6 weeks after the wedding, a Tuesday morning, 6:15 a.m. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the offices of Sullivan and Caldwell. 4 federal agents stepped out. At the same time, same minute, coordinated to the second, a second team arrived at the Sullivan estate in Loudoun County. Garrett Sullivan answered the door in a bathrobe, hair uncombed, coffee still in his hand. When he saw the badges, the color left his face like someone had pulled a plug. He said 5 words. "Do you know who my father is?" The lead agent, not Regina, she was coordinating from the field office, didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. He's being arrested right now." Garrett's coffee hit the floor. Across town, Teddy Sullivan was escorted out of his home in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He just stared straight ahead like a man who had always believed this day would never come and couldn't process the fact that it had. The charges were laid out that afternoon. Federal indictment. Grand jury. Theodore Teddy Sullivan. 16 counts of wire fraud. 4 counts of money laundering. 2 counts of obstruction of justice. 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States. Garrett Sullivan. 12 counts of wire fraud. 3 counts of money laundering. 2 counts of filing false documents. 1 count of witness tampering for pressuring Olivia to sign documents under false pretenses. Douglas Caldwell. Cooperation agreement. Reduced charges in exchange for full testimony against both Sullivans. The mugshots were taken that same day. The narrator in me wants to describe the look on Garrett's face in his booking photo. But honestly, you already know what it looked like. It looked like a man who spent his whole life believing the rules didn't apply to him, standing in a room where the rules were the only thing that mattered.
The same face that smirked at Regina across that ballroom, the same mouth that called her a cockroach, now flattened by the weight of 23 federal charges and the very real possibility of spending the next 3 decades behind bars. Now, Olivia.
This was the part that kept Regina up at night. Her cousin's name was on those shell companies. Her signature was on incorporation documents. On paper, she looked guilty. A prosecutor who didn't know the full story could easily have included her in the indictment. But the evidence told a different story. Olivia had no access to the accounts. She received no funds. She had no knowledge of the company's activities. The signatures were obtained through deliberate misrepresentation. Garrett told her the documents were tax paperwork. Regina's early intervention, Olivia's cooperation,
and Colton Perry's testimony all confirmed the same thing. Olivia Moore was not a partner in the fraud. She was a tool of it. The federal prosecutor reviewed the file and made the call. Olivia was not charged. She was classified as a victim of financial coercion. The prenup, the one Olivia signed without her own attorney, the one Garrett used to lock down control of their finances, was voided in the divorce proceedings. The court found it had been executed under conditions of fraud. Everything Garrett had built to protect himself became the evidence that buried him. But this story doesn't end with handcuffs and mugshots. Because punishment without change is just revenge. And this case forced something bigger. Loudoun County launched an independent audit of every contract awarded to Sullivan and Caldwell going back a decade. 3 additional fraudulent contracts were identified beyond the original 6. Taxpayer money, real money from real people, had been stolen for years while the system looked the other way. The County Inspector General's office implemented new oversight procedures, mandatory third-party invoice verification on all construction contracts, independent review of any inquiry flagged as low priority, the kind of safeguards that should have existed all along, but didn't because the people in charge trusted the people with money. Douglas Caldwell resigned from his county position. His replacement was hired through an open, competitive process. No family connections, no handshakes in back rooms. At Garrett's arraignment, he stood before a judge in a suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. Bail conditions? No contact with Olivia or any member of the Davis family. As he was led out of the courtroom, a reporter shouted, "Mr. Sullivan, do you have anything to say to your wife's family?" Garrett said nothing. For the first time in his life, the man who always had a clever remark had nothing to say. He once asked who would believe Regina. Turns out the answer was a federal grand jury. So where are they now? Regina Davis went back to work. No press conference, no interviews, no victory lap. She walked back into the FBI field office the following Monday, sat down at her desk, and opened the next case file. That's who she is. The Sullivan investigation eventually became a training case study at Quantico, used to teach new agents how to build a financial crimes prosecution from the ground up. Regina's name is on the file. She's never talked about it publicly. She doesn't need to. Olivia Moore. She took her family name back, moved home to the D.C. area. She enrolled in a social work program, focusing on financial abuse in intimate relationships. She wanted to understand what happened to her. Not just the fraud, the control, the isolation. The way Garrett turned her trust into a weapon. Every Monday morning, Aunt Lorraine drives her to campus. They don't talk much on those rides. They don't need to. Nathan Brooks received a commendation from the county for his role in exposing the fraud. He's now assigned to a joint financial crimes task force, a position that didn't exist before the Sullivan case created the need for it. He still keeps a copy of Regina's business card in his desk drawer. He told a colleague once, "That's the best agent I've ever worked with." And she was on vacation when she cracked the case. Colton Perry testified at the federal trial. He told the truth about the shredded documents, about the IRS letterhead, about the summer he spent watching Teddy Sullivan operate like the law was something that happened to other people. After his testimony, he lost every friend he had in the Sullivan circle. Every last one. A reporter asked him if he regretted coming forward. He said, "I regret not saying something at that reception. I stood there and watched a man tear a woman apart, and I did nothing. I'll carry that for the rest of my life. The least I could do was tell the truth when it finally mattered." Garrett Sullivan is awaiting trial.
If convicted on all counts, he faces up to 30 years in federal prison. His attorneys have filed motions to delay. The court denied every one. And Teddy Sullivan, the man who built the scheme, ran the money, and told his son to use his own wife as a firewall, sits in a holding facility waiting for a trial date. His bourbon collection is still in his study. Nobody's there to drink it.
Man, imagine someone calls your mother a cockroach at her own family's table, and the whole room just watches. What would you do? Tell me in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe.